right, and good afternoon, good evening to everyone who is still here after a rigorous day of debate. I'm glad to see that we have the esteemed and valuable members of the audience still with us. So for much of the day we have been discussing solar and storage and various aspects thereof. We've prepared quite a few items regarding solar and storage that we'd like to discuss before you, and we'd like to encourage lively debate. I think some of what we were preparing to discuss has actually already been discussed, so let's see if we can dig in. Okay, so first of all, the topic is bulk energy storage a better way to addressing shortages? I would just like to remind people a few years ago, we were discussing a very similar topic, but in that case, we were speaking only about renewables or just solar. So in our recent memory, we can see how technology in the market has moved and changed. But I would like to hand over to a great stalwart of the solar energy, renewable energy industry in South Africa, which is Davin Chown, who's probably been punting renewables for a good 2-3 decades. But yeah, so Davin, I'd love to hear from Genesis' view, how you see storage, how it has evolved over time in South Africa in the last few years, and how are we different to what's happening elsewhere in the world?
Thanks very much. Everybody can hear okay? Not booming too much. Thanks, Nicola. Yeah, I think it's a very interesting one for South Africa. If you look at where we came from years ago, there was this argument that renewables couldn't happen without storage. And if you remember at the time with the whole debate being very much fossil fuel oriented and everybody saying the industry is not going to get legs, it's not suited to industrial scale development, and it's never going to provide a solution for South Africa at the scale that we need. The debate around storage was always renewables can't work without storage. It was like putting the two hand in glove and saying that they're absolutely coupled and they have to intrinsically work together. And we've seen that develop over years. And the argument that I guess Nicola was thrown at us all the time was around what do we do? We've got pumped storage like Ingula and others, we've got the Palmit, etc. What role is that playing? And that got quietly pushed aside. It wasn't recognized. And we had to bring it up in those days to say, it doesn't matter what electricity source we're using it. If we don't use it, we lose it. So why is it that Eskom is using pumped storage? And we had to sort of come at it from a very crude level of debate to start getting people to understand that renewables didn't have to have storage. And the argument then crept in about, well, at what level, at what penetration, and we started going into those discussions about where would it come from, would renewables grow, was there a future for renewables, to the extent that we'd actually need storage. So storage always seemed to be the front line, and renewables was this tag along. And we've seen that whole thing change quite rapidly if we compare ourselves to other markets. But we also see, fascinatingly enough, that the actual storage market we're sitting with now is operating at a number of different levels. And people talk to us about the bulk storage, and I guess our session is focused around bulk storage, and we keep getting asked, what is bulk storage? Where is bulk storage going to play this role? Are we talking about more Ingulas? Are we talking about pumped hydro at a much bigger scale? Or are we talking disaggregated, decentralized storage, where you're having let's say, for instance, a gated community that's got significant amount of storage installed, and if we aggregate that and put that into a mini-grid, etc., is that what we start talking about large-scale storage? Does it have to be the Ingulas, the very large storage we're seeing, the Eskom kind of programs that we're seeing? So I think coming from that history where it's been a very crude kind of definition around storage and what role storage has played, we're starting to see that it's a much more granular, sophisticated discussion along what storage can provide to the market. But in actual fact, it's gone way beyond debate. It's gone to implementation, where I think what we're starting to see from the early days of policy discussion is very much that the market is leading policy implementation. The market is starting to shape what's happening with the policies. Policymakers are having to react and catch up, much as they did when solar went to literally every rooftop around town. The policymakers were not ready for what was going to happen. And I do think in the policy realm, to finish off there, that we're definitely starting to see a situation where the authorities are reacting to a lot more at the moment, even as trading opens up. As an example, I'm sure you all know this last week that Eskom basically turned around and said, we're not going to support any more traders, we're not going to support their license applications. So as we go through this evolving market, we keep seeing the crude level of things happening, a very much a resist, push back, the technology can't work, there's too much of this, there's too much renewables, it's going to destabilize the grid. We're seeing that argument having now to change and become a lot more sophisticated in the way that regulators at the various different levels start to respond to the changes in the market. Yeah. So that's what I think has been very interesting, coming from this whole thing about, well, if we argue that you need storage for renewables, what's Eskom doing with all its pump storage all these years? And coming from that very reactive thing to a market that's literally leading our regulatory agencies into the future.
Thank you, Devin. I know that we've been speaking quite a lot about battery energy storage systems, BESS, but there are, of course, other aspects of storage. Electricity storage, energy can neither be created nor destroyed, so you convert it into different forms. And just while we're on that tack, I know it's not a technology discussion, but perhaps, Federico, you might be able to expand also on Abengoa's exploits in CSP and how your market is changing for that technology as well.
Absolutely. Thanks very much. First, so just following on your line, the storage has not happened just now in South Africa. There are many projects that are bulk storage that was done by Eskom years ago. But then on the first round of renewables, I guess it was like 2010, 2011, when this whole program, Eskom was launching it, like the big window one. We built CSP plants here with Abengoa at the time. And there was a request for the CSP plants to actually be able to supply electricity on the peak hours. And being solar plants, the only way that can be done is by having a storage included in the project itself, like hybridizing the plant. So this is a different type of storage because it actually stores the heat of the sun into molten salt. And then it's used later, whenever it's actually needed. It transforms it again into electricity by turbining it. So it's not the normal chemical storage that we are used to seeing into inverters in houses or like in big battery projects or even in cars. This is a different sort of storage that has been used and it's proven to work and it's mostly goes into the long hours of storage. You can, with this type of systems, you can actually move into a renewable facility into a base load facility, which if you think on base load, Eskom now supplies the whole base load for the country with coal plants. And this is something that they want to change in the future. In fact, there is a plan to be like out of coal by 2050. So there must be ways in which you have to reach that target, not only with renewables, not only with a small scale bulk storage or small mini grids as was just mentioned, but also in big projects you need a different kind of storage that might be able to manage the load during 12 hours, for example. And that's basically what we need in solar plants that need to supply power at night. So that technology is still being developed, not really the same technology that we built in the Northern Cape, but new technology that is being tested and is been now under development in coal facilities in Germany, for example. These facilities are being decommissioned, and in order to put this new salt thermal storage system, to see if it actually works, to test it as pilot projects, and see if that it's something that Eskom might think when changing their coal plants to bring to South Africa. So that's another option.
Yep.
And I see that's a bright future with a different technology for storage, especially for the South African market. Thank you.
Thank you. Of course, we don't only have the context of BESS for bulk storage. We also do need to consider that there's another aspect of storage, which is distributed storage, where we see a lot of large-scale power users, even residential power users, who've got storage behind the meter and are able to use storage for a different purpose. So not necessarily just grid security for an individual user, but additionally for versatility and for load management. And I think either Matthew or Daniel, if you wanted to speak to the versatility of using grid behind the meter, that would be, yeah?
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Our company, Sustainable Power Generation, produces high voltage BESS at the commercial scale. So to offer a slightly contrarian view is, what does the individual do when there are grid outages? You can have bulk storage installed on the 50 megawatt, 200 megawatt hour configuration and there above. And that gives Eskom dispatchability as a network service provider, but the problem isn't only availability of the kilowatt hours, it's also the municipal infrastructure that smaller clients would sit behind. So your an outage, a 12-hour unexpected outage, or rather, sorry, step backwards. Load shedding happens on a schedule. You know when it happens, it's planned for, but municipal infrastructure can disappear on a moment's notice. Cable theft or something burns out, and you have no idea when it's coming back, for how long. And so the private sector needs a variety of options available for their energy security. The same way we have private healthcare, private security, we also need private energy. And where, one final comment, the bulk can also be aggregated. So if a municipality has incentivized a number of its residents or its the businesses within its jurisdiction to have suitable scale storage, the municipality can incentivize access to that storage so that it doesn't have to procure its own storage under its procurement program. So send out a market signal that network participants can dispatch into, and so that allows all stakeholders to benefit and manage their risk accordingly. Thank you.
Hi, Matthew Sylvester, good afternoon. We're an independent power producer. We focus on heavy industry, mining, agriculture across Africa. And until recently, we weren't focused on South Africa at all. So all of our projects were multi-energy sources for off-grid locations across Africa. And one of the big focuses there was optimizing your bulk energy storage. Some of the ones we worked on did have grid, and as Daniel mentioned, unlike here, it was unexpected when it went down, and if they went down, they would go down for days or weeks at a time. So in essence, you couldn't rely on the bulk energy storage because nothing can last that long, so we still had to have HSO, DFO to backing up the grid, large-scale solar to power it. But the main focus on the batteries was to not the storage so much, but it was the control of your system and controlling where your energy came from, always using the lowest cost of energy for the operator. So it was a focus on the price and security, yeah, but on your control over the whole overall system. And the municipalities should be looking at similar type solutions. It gives you that control, it wastes a lot less energy, you're not spilling kilowatt hours, you're conserving them and you're using them when they're needed at the peak times, etc.
I just want to add to that as well, Daniel as well. The question around bulk storage is we already have bulk storage available in South Africa. It just happens to be decentralized over a number of smaller users. And obviously we can talk about the scale of that. And we need to, within South Africa, as Matthew pointed out, the biggest problem is how to utilize that. And the question is not whether it is a better way within South Africa, it is how do we better utilize the existing bulk storage within South Africa. Unfortunately, due to the large 2 years, lots of private individuals have already invested the capital within it. It's just a question of how to get that capital out.
if I could just stretch that. So I'm just curious for your behind-the-meter clients, C&I, large power user clients who have got battery assets installed, how many of them are open to this suggestion where they've paid for an asset and they're willing to share the storage capacity of the asset where they've actually invested the capex?
It's already happening. Most of the large users within South Africa are on some form of time of use. And originally they've installed the asset for an energy security solution. And all of a sudden, within the last 100 days, people are like goldfish. They've just figured out that there's no load shedding, therefore we've got an asset that is not earning us money in any form. The asset has already been invested, so from a practical perspective, it just makes sense. Even though you are technically degrading your battery by cycling, short term, it just makes sense utilizing that battery as much as possible. So we've had requests from nearly every one of our installed clients, how do I make it work for us? And that's definitely a thing that's already happening.
Yeah.
I think one of the speakers touched on it earlier. All the mines in this country are on time of use, so they have peak charges early in the morning and late in the evening. And that is going to come to the industrial and eventually to the households as well, like they do in other countries. And that's when batteries are really going to take off in this country. I mean, there's been a boom the last 2 years. Eskom, I think everyone up here, we know them as our marketing department. They've been very, very good for our business. They've promoted it dramatically. But once you have that time of use and you start shifting the loads from very low cost energy to the peak times, that's when you're going to see the real value of it, and that's when it's really going to take off in this market.
Okay, and thank you very much. Yeah, that so another aspect of this, which I think I do want to sort of steer a question towards Tsepo, because he's got the best knowledge on the grid application rule. So let's say we are keen to charge our BESS systems. Are we allowed to charge them using the grid, or how does it change the investment into such an asset if we know and understand the grid rules?
Thanks, Nicola. Yeah, I think in terms of whether we're allowed to charge our batteries, I think it's obviously based on the application for the assets. I think at the moment, if you look at the grid connection applications, it allows for that, where you would want to install a BSF, a battery energy storage facility, in terms of based on the application you want for whatever transaction, whether you actually want to generate power using your own plant, store it, and then provide to the NSP as an ancillary service, or whether you want to use your battery as a form of a load for load shaving. So I think at the moment the NSP would allow for that. Maybe the difficulty in it is obviously the actual PPA transaction, in terms of how would you use that that facility. As an IPP, I think we've been involved in several procurement programs, where we looked at storage that is coupled with renewable energy, as we saw with the risk mitigation procurement program. But recently also been involved in just a pure battery energy storage procurement program, where this was more for on the Eskom side in terms of the NSP, where the risk mitigation was more on delivering energy that was needed during emergency conditions such as load shedding. So I think the use of storage can vary. The critical part just becomes on the actual PPA and the off-taker in terms of what is the application, and obviously getting the right tariff for that. Yeah.
So we have now been speaking about load shedding and the apparent absence of load shedding, and I know on the utility side of the renewable energy space, we are still pushing to get financial closure on large-scale projects, but certainly there has been a market shift from direct consumers from the CNI customer base. Leonidas, I don't know if you'd like to, how has the recent change in the load shedding schedule in fact impacted the deployment of BESS in South Africa? Could you comment on that?
Got you. Thanks for the opportunity. I think for behind the meter applications, the business case remains robust. Of course, the urgency of not having load shedding perhaps increases the sales cycle to drag the deal over the line. But I think the benefit stacking that the end consumer gets where they have this financial asset, a best solution, where they can, businesses are always looking for ways to save money on their electricity bill. So with these solutions, they can save money with peak shaving, arbitrage, and then of course, something we see is with a lot of intermittent renewable sources being onboarded onto the grid, aging infrastructure. Commercial and industrial clients struggle a lot with unstable voltages, power quality becomes a problem. So for behind the meter applications, you also really can offer a stable output. Another benefit is in City of Joburg, for instance, we had load reduction recently, so it's not exactly load shedding, but load reduction, where they basically cap the power they give you. If you have a commercial battery solution, of course, that battery can then supplement the load to keep your output unaffected. So I think definitely while the load shedding is not having load shedding is welcomed by most businesses, and the sales cycles perhaps to get those deals over the line has perhaps become a bit more increasingly difficult. I think there are a lot of benefits that have to be explained to these commercial clients so they really understand how these assets can work for them. And I believe the business case is robust, and I think there will still be a firm business into the future.
And then an open question for the panel. Just if we could see a policy change or some kind of regulation change to support storage being implemented in South Africa, what would you suggest? Would you encourage would you duties or tax reductions? Any suggestions? What would you like to see?
Sorry. So this is not a question that is limited to South Africa alone. Various other countries within the world have suffered from similar instances. I think the most prominent one has always been the California issue, especially exacerbated by the Californian energy crisis, probably more than a decade ago now, where they had similar things. And what they basically have is they have some form of, let's call it an energy stock exchange, basically a buy and sell number. And the market naturally regulates itself. If you've got an abundance of free power, the price goes down. And when you've got too little availability, then the price just goes up. And people either learn to turn off their stuff or pay the higher price. Or it naturally generates a let's call it a market for stuff like base storage.
The potential for the batteries there is that they can be so flexible in how they're used. You can focus them on the result you need. So it's moving forward. It's a very bright future for bulk energy storage in this country and across Africa, I would say.
One last comment. You mentioned the market, and I mentioned previously the pricing signal. If a municipality were willing to buy dispatched energy from a municipal stakeholder, that alone would unlock, or I believe would add a use case to our clients looking at battery storage. We already have backup, we already have arbitrage, we already have peak shaving to embedded customers. So if the municipality agrees to buy back energy, and this isn't a massive policy change or a new subsidy or a tariff, it's creating the digital infrastructure to meter and credit on a bill, and that allows us to add another line into the financial model and get that project that much further over the line.
So I'm hearing a lot of suggestions about the use of system tariffs and Well, I mean, yeah, essentially, so opening that up, changing that, or allowing the municipalities to figure out how to actually do use of grid system tariffs would allow generators, solar and BESS to feed back into the grid. That would definitely open up the market, as well as seeing some free trade. I did enjoy your comment, Daniel Willemse, about more energy there is and the lower the tariffs will become. So as we are pushing for more energy on the grid, do you think that in a couple of years' time, do you think we're going to see the tariff structure decrease, or from Eskom and from NERSA? What do you think is going to happen? I mean, how do we invest in these assets if in 10 years' time can we still expect 15% year-on-year tariff increases? Are you saying it's going to change?
I'm holding the microphone. So
Other
I
Daniel,
feel-
actually, Daniel Willemse.
Yeah. What Eskom's going to do is up to Eskom. Look, if they start taking energy from all these users, we're all putting in large-scale batteries at the moment. If they're allowed to put it back on at peak times, which would be wonderful for the grid because it takes a lot of the strain off them. In essence, Eskom have already said to us on projects, it's zero feedback to the grid. Zero, you can't put anything back. But they have softened a little, and they are talking about if you put BESS on, they'll let you put it back on at the peak times to help them. So, but they're so far in debt, I don't think it's going to change how they put their costs up. They've still got so many infrastructure, and with all this extra power, the extra infrastructure they need to transmit it, to bolster the systems, so there's zero chance. 10 years' time, they're still going to be asking for just as much money every year.
Yeah, okay. No, I thought so.
I just want to add to that and say the huge advantage that energy storage has is we don't necessarily need to plan 15 years into the future. The problem with trying to generate or adding a lot of these generational plants, for example, coal plants, is you have to plan for 20 years' time. And historically within South Africa, we've seen massive ballooning costs of literally what your kilowatt hour is going to cost. I'm not going to point fingers to which last 2 or 3 plants went up, but it wasn't what their original budget was. While adding BESS systems allows us to add it in very short time at a very limited budget and quite small. You don't need to go massive. You can go small and see what the impact is.
Yeah, something if I can add as well regarding the economics here. I mean, during the past years, we have seen a steep decrease in energy storage kilowatt hour pricing, right? So this will keep happening, especially when new technologies are developed. I mean, what are like new technologies today will become mature technologies in a couple of years, and will keep going down. I mean, that's a trend, and the trend in the world. And especially if you see where other countries are going, that is usually, I mean, for example, Spain. In Spain now, that has massive PV facilities, massive wind facilities, they have now asked to all the big PPAs that have been signed to add a storage facility next to them and to actually apply for that permit in the different municipalities so that they can not only like have undispatchable facilities, but dispatchable facilities that can actually bring some stability to the grid. So I guess that any investment that anybody is thinking in storage, it will make sense. If it doesn't make sense today, it will make sense in the next couple of years. I think that that's the trend that all the market is going with this.
I'm glad you brought up the topic of grid stability, because I think, so also we have got quite a few solar projects that, I mean, you don't just get immediate access to the grid. There is the process of applying for a grid connection capacity, and we need to obviously apply to our national operator, Eskom, at the moment. But there have been a few changes in the way that you apply for connection capacity, and developers are including battery energy systems as part of their development process. But Tsepo, we were having a discussion earlier about how that application for connection capacity might be able to change now that we're actually economically able to include BESS. How would that, so actually, how does BESS benefit the grid, not just the market and that's it, but how does it actually benefit grid?
Thanks. Yeah, I think, look, I think BESS, it benefits the grid because, it's dispatchable. So, I mean, the same applications that you would get from a synchronized generator, you could be able to get from a BESS facility, whether from a voltage support perspective. And I mean, if you start having, your grid following inverters also installed in the facility, you can also have inertia. And I think to give a good example of how important BESS would be from a grid stability and, sort of opening up the capacity, is the mere fact that if you can have bulk BESS connecting within the Northern Cape region where you have a lot of solar penetration and a very low load, meaning that whatever is generated within that network has to go into the transmission network and then transmitted to our load hubs, which is Gauteng, Mpumalanga, and the northern region of the actual country. But if you can then sort of decentralize your load, then you'll be able to store whatever that is produced by these PV plants during the peak hours. And then obviously when the plants ramp down, you can then be able to dispatch the energy that is actually stored. But I think the next step then will be to actually solve the grid instability that comes with that, where you now have this chunk of of generation that is sitting in the storage facilities, and obviously our inertia gets affected. I think maybe the next step that our OEMs would have to look towards is, can they provide solutions that are grid forming rather than grid following? And I think they are there, the technology, but obviously at the storage level, at a large scale level, that's where we can actually start looking into.
Devin, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I'd like to pick up a couple of things there. I mean, I think the grid issue is absolutely critical, but what we are seeing across the country is this, I think all the speakers have talked about it, there's people starting to come and realize what's the value of storage at the different scales that we've talked about. There's another element to that, which is long duration storage. So we talk bulk, but the question is, are we talking long duration storage, and what impact's that going to have over time? The thing that I've noticed with a lot of the procurement that's going on, and if you have a look at City of Cape Town, they very quickly caught up in terms of what the value would be. And that value has seen them start to procure and develop their own storage projects. One of the interesting things with the Kureleni, if you ever look at their program, they started procuring and putting out tenders for large amounts of solar, and they've turned around now to everybody at a very late stage and said, can you add storage to this? Because we're looking at that impact. We can't manage because of the nature of exactly those issues, the grid issues. And you're seeing two other municipalities do a very similar thing. You're starting to understand the value of storage and not just the argument that storage has to come with renewables, but not really understand it. My last comment, perhaps just to throw into the middle of this, is we heard the comments, I should say, from the CEO of Discovery Green, for example, turning around and saying to all the people in the market at that conference in Joburg that all the players that have been procuring so much solar have actually gone and over-invested in solar. So they've been making some pretty provocative statements in the market. And we're trying to understand, well, where are they trying to lead the market? Where are they seeing the opportunity? And very much, I think, from a storage point of view, that is where the opportunity is going, where people are starting to say, you've got all this generation capacity that you've invested in. What are you going to do with it when you can't use it at certain times, or when you've got to curtail, or when it's constrained? What are you going to do? So it's going to be very interesting to see how a lot of these players shift from wanting to procure more generation capacity to starting to understand what is the value and how is the new market system as it comes into play over the next 2 to 3 years, I guess. And you're starting to see day-ahead trading and all these mechanisms coming to play. When that starts to happen, I think very much the value of storage together with other generation options will be seen in the market, but it'll become a lot more clear and a lot more tangible. So I think we're still taking baby steps at the moment. We're not quite sure how the regulators are going to respond to this. Thanks.
Thanks very much. So I would like to take the opportunity to allow the floor to address any questions to the panelists. Sure. Okay, we've got a question at the back there.
Jenny, sorry.
We'll just wait for the mic. Yeah, we can hear you.
I would just like to hear your views on the potential of EVs as mobile storage in the future, because they provide an opportunity to be charged during the day with renewables, driven home only using a small amount of their capacity, and then plugged in to help smooth peak times for your house, as an example. And that could be a way, if you looked at the impact on shopping centers, one of my pet hates, paying for parking, being able to give your electricity to a shopping center when you arrive there rather than paying for parking. And I understand EVs aren't huge here at the moment, but 5 years from now, we could have rolling batteries all over the country.
I can give my personal view. Sorry, it's not my field of expertise, the EVs. But just thinking again on what is been done in Europe, right? I mean, and like some cities around the world, like saying that they are going to ban fuel cars in 2030, 2035, 2040. That's not going to happen in South Africa. And I think that the main reason is because today, I mean, the base load is still being done by coal. So wherever you go and charge an electrical vehicle here in South Africa, you are actually using electricity, or I don't know, 80% of the electricity that you're using is coming from coal plants, right? So I guess that would be the first point to be addressed. Is like, how are you charging those EVs, right? Because if you are like just using more coal capacity, I think that you are making the problem even a bit worse, right? Because discharging makes these changes. So it's more or less the same as having a battery at your house. That being said, I do believe that it's common sense for the future. I mean, if you have in a parking lot, in a shopping center, PV modules on the top, on the rooftops, and then you have like charging facilities for your cars, it's great. I mean, you can go shopping, you can charge your car there, you can pay your fee for charging your car there, and then it can go back home, and you need to have the proper facility to install it and actually discharge it at your home, right? So that market, for me, it's something that is going to happen. How close is it? Not really sure to say. You know, I mean, it's many different things that should happen at the same time. No, like having this facility to charge, and then having the electrical vehicles easy to be bought here in South Africa, right? So that's my view. Not being an expert in the subject.
Thank you.
Sure, we have another question.
My good sir.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Theodore. I'm a project engineer from a company called Photon Capital. And one of the panelists, name is Orve from Neosun. He said that the battery are the most expensive component in a PV system. So I do have two questions, economic and technical questions. So I'm going to start with the economic one. So in terms of pricing, how much will it cost to a project capex when including battery storage, especially in utility scale projects? And how long does it take to expect a return on the investment? That's the first question. And the second one is, we mostly use battery for peak shaving, and you do have experience, and that question is based on your experience. In terms of dispatching, how many hours per day is best for a battery storage to dispatch, and what's the best way to charge the battery, using the grid or the PV panels? Thank you so much.
Okay, so the first question, battery capex and return. Daniel, will you?
Yeah,
Yeah.
so from an economics perspective, it all depends on what you're comparing the cost of the battery with. If you are comparing your BESS system to a diesel generator, which is burning 1/4 of a liter for every kilowatt hour that you generate, then obviously that's a magnificent comparison. It's totally competitive with that. If you're comparing this with the cost of the grid, unfortunately, it's typically not, and I mean the average grid price, it unfortunately is not necessarily competitive. But there are certain ways, for example, as they said, load shifting, for example, charging the battery at your low tariff rate. And I know Ekurhuleni, if I can remember correctly, they're charging something like 1 rand during the low periods and then like 9 rand during peak. So obviously if there's an 8 rand difference between the two, it does make sense to charge and then discharge at essentially and gaining that 8 rand. Then it offsets the price of that battery system. So it all depends on what your economic factors are or measurements are.
To extend on that, like we use our battery on off-grid systems, as I said. So we use the battery as a fuel displacement. Yeah, exactly as he said, just get rid of as much diesel usage as you can because it's by far the most expensive source of power out there. And in a lot of the countries we work in West Africa, the grid price still, we calculate battery on a 8 to 12 year, depending on how many cycles per day. It's still more economical than grid. So you try and displace grid. You try and use solar first, then battery, then grid, then diesel, and you rank your system. So the return on investment comes down to what the other sources are and how often you're using it, basically. So it can be discerned and you have to model it for each project.
And just to add to what you were saying about modeling for each project, batteries are today where solar was a couple of years ago. Solar alone increases savings and revenue. Batteries is a solution. You solve a lot more. You can solve a problem with batteries, whether your problem is an expensive tariff or an unreliable grid or a remote location, and that also has an effect on the payback period.
I know, Theodore, you had another question about charge cycles, but we are running short of time, so I might ask you to come.
Use your battery as much as you want to, as you can. If you paid for it, use it.
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much. So we're going to wrap up. I just want to say thank you very much to the panelists for speaking. We had a good discussion talking about the history of renewables and battery and how it has incurred. Really very good to discuss the other versatile aspects of what we can use BESS for, such as grid stability. I think that's something that we really should preach to Eskom and all of the grid operators, and something we'll probably see changing in the use case for batteries. And really good to also get a slightly different perspective on what is bulk storage, not just necessarily giant battery packs plonked on land, how do we charge them, and also let's talk about decentralized storage and CSP and other storage techniques. So, yeah, thank you very much, panelists.
Thank you.
All right.
Ladies and gentlemen, as they are taking their picture, a kind reminder that once